Hey guys, welcome to another episode of From Pen to Page. It's been a minute, but I'm back with another book review. And actually, this book review is a little different because I'm going to be comparing The Shining, the book, to The Shining, the movie. And asking the questions, who did it better? Was it the book or the movie? As we look at the characters, at the story, and the themes of both. So stick around. The Shining. It's interesting. The Shining is a movie. Well, I saw the movie first, and I should be honest about that. I saw the movie years before I ever read the book. And I love the Stanley Kubrick film. It's great. I love Stanley Kubrick as a director. He's an auteur. He did some amazing stuff. So eventually, this last year, I got around to finally reading the Stephen King novel, and I was blown away at the differences. And it it wasn't just that it was different, it was almost a completely different story. And I wanted to talk about, if we were to compare the movie to the book, which one sat with me more? And I need to address this first. This is just my opinion, and you may agree or you may disagree, but stick around and let's see if any of these ideas, resonate with you. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the character of Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson in the movie. When we first meet Jack and Wendy and Danny as they're driving up the mountain, we get a sense very slightly that Jack's a little bit off the hinges already. Just by the way he replies, his mannerisms, his characterization, it seems like he's kind of on the edge of cracking just a little bit. And throughout the movie, we see him like that. He's always kind of unstable. It's like he's on the verge of just completely losing it. As he interacts with the hotel and he sees all the hauntings and he kind of becomes possessed by the hotel's evil spirit, it's almost like that spirit was already present in him and the hotel was just sort of unveiling it. Versus the book, where Jack Torrance is a really sympathetic protagonist. In the movie, we get the feeling that Danny's the protagonist. He's the one that has to kind of navigate the craziness of his father and the hauntings and the terrible things he sees, and his mother melting down. But in the book, it's really Jack Torrance and him battling these demonic forces that are present in this hotel. He's also battling alcoholism, and you can see that struggle throughout the book is there. And throughout the book, he is actively pushing against being influenced by his addiction, but also being influenced by these supernatural forces. And I think that's the most interesting takeaway from the book versus the movie is that Jack, by the end of the book, and I know this is a spoiler, so spoiler alert, Jack, by the end, before he dies, actually regains his composure, regains himself long enough to get to tell Danny and to tell Wendy to get out of the hotel before he blows it up with the boilers. So he actually has a redemptive arc by the very end of the book. In the movie, Jack totally allows himself to be taken over and, chases Danny, famously through the hedge maze with an axe. So Jack was much more sympathetic a character in the book than he was in the movie. Wendy, too, interestingly enough, Wendy in the book, much more put together, understands what's going on and shows a quiet resilience. Like she's stuck in a very bad situation. She's stuck in this hotel up on a mountain with her kid, and her husband is losing it. And she's trying to kind of keep the peace and keep him calm while still trying to find a way off the mountain with Danny. So she's much more aware of what's going on and she's stronger for it. And then, Danny and Tony, Danny's imaginary friend, which another big spoiler alert, Tony is basically Danny from the future, which I never picked up on. I thought that was an interesting takeaway is that Danny's full name is Danny Anthony Torrance, right? So the fact that like Tony is basically his future self guiding him and protecting him throughout this kind of slowly becomes apparent in the book. In the movie, you never get a clue who Tony is. You think it might be a spirit or something. You're not really sure. And it's never really revealed to us. But Danny also is much more fleshed out in the book. So if I were to say which one does it better, the movie or the book as far as characters go, absolutely the book does. So we go to the fourth character in the book, which is, of course, the hotel. Now, in the book, the hotel is very much a supernatural presence. It almost speaks to Jack. And I guess in a way it does through the bartender and some of the ghosts that he interacts with. But it's supernaturally evil and it's present and it actively wants the shining that Danny and Jack are giving off. So it's very much a character in that way. In the film, it's much more ambiguous than the novel. It's hinted that the hotel has a supernatural presence, but it's very like it could be psychological, it could just be Jack's own delusions. Kubrick does a really good job of making you try and figure out if it's the hotel that's evil, or it's Jack, or it's psychological, or it's really happening. So that ambiguity adds a lot of eeriness and mood to the story, I guess. So in that way, I almost feel like the film does a better job of representing the evil in the story. Not that that a building couldn't be supernaturally evil, it could, but it's just a lot more nuanced when Kubrick took the material and kind of threw in that psychological element of like, hey, is this even really happening or is it not? I love the way he shot it in that way. And so I would give the hotel, the way it's represented, to Kubrick on that one. And then we get on to some more symbolic elements between the book and the movie. So, of course, most famously, the book does not have a hedge maze. It actually has these large topiary animals that seem to come alive when Danny and Jack are around them, and they seem almost predatory. I don't think Kubrick in the late 70s or early 80s when he filmed The Shining, they didn't really have an ability to show that on camera in a way that would look believable. And so they went with like a hedge maze. So the question is like, which one really played out better? That's really tough. I'm really on the fence on that one because visually the hedge maze is so iconic. Jack Torrance chasing his son Danny through the snow-filled hedge maze is frightening and it keeps you on the edge of your seat and it's done so well. However, the topiary animals coming alive, as Stephen King talks about them, is also super creepy. So I don't know which is better. It's hard to say. They're both really creepy in very different ways. And then also we have the boiler room. And, this is another kind of thematic element. In the book, the boiler room is almost a symbol of Jack Torrance's rage building up, right? The dark side of himself going to burst at any minute. And in the book, it's kind of like this parallel with what's going on in the hotel, all the evil spirits coming to a head and bursting. And so the boiler room works really well in the book. In the movie, the boiler room really isn't addressed much at all. I think there's like one shot where Jack goes in there and learns about it, and he mentions it once, but that's it. It's really cut out. Um, and it's interesting because the sequel to The Shining, Doctor Sleep, in the film version of Doctor Sleep, what happened at the end of The Shining now happens at the end of Doctor Sleep, where basically Danny, now grown up, blows up the hotel in a way to save the people he cares for from the spirits within the hotel. So he kind of, they kind of take that beat from the original Shining and put it in Doctor Sleep. So in that case, the book, as far as the boiler motif goes, is better. So overall, which one did those two things better? Slightly the book. And I'll just say slightly because Kubrick did a fantastic visual job with the maze, which leads us to kind of the end of the story. And again, if you haven't seen The Shining, like at this point, you need to just go watch the film or read the book. So obviously spoilers here. So at the end of the book, Jack is about to blow up the hotel with the boiler rooms, trying to kill all the evilness within. Dick Halloran shows up and does survive, grabs Danny, grabs Wendy, and gets them out of there, and they get out. Jack dies in a fiery explosion. In the film, Dick Halloran gets killed off in 3 seconds by Jack, and then Jack freezes to death in the maze. So, which ending is better? Well, that's tough. Again, it kind of changes the whole tone. So like in the book, we see a little while later that Danny and Wendy are kind of, upstate New York, and Dick visits them, and Danny and Dick kind of have this hug in this moment where Danny kind of finally lets out all this stuff, all this pain that he's been internalizing from this whole traumatic experience at the hotel. And it's really touching. And what Dick says to Danny about grief and about the loss of his father and all these terrible things that happened at the Overlook, I was actually really touched by what he says. In the movie, though, it ends with Jack becoming part of the hotel. And he's sort of there, in the photograph at the final, the 1920s photograph where he's there in the ballroom, like he was always part of this hotel. I guess what we're looking at there is that one kind of has a humanistic element to the ending. One's very much about loss and death and building yourself and growing from traumatic events in your life and kind of the strength of those characters. And one is very much cosmic horror, like there's just some malevolent entity that sucks up people. So, this one's tough for me too, because it's like I like both endings. And I guess it really depends on where you stand as a viewer. Do you like more of a cosmic horror thing, or do you like an ending that has some more actual life truths in it? And I would guess in that way, probably the book has a slightly better ending for me, even though I love the cosmic horror of the hotel somehow sucking people up. At the end of the day, it was the book's ending that got to me much more on an emotional level. Which brings us to thematic focus. So let's talk about kind of those types of endings. The book is very much about abuse and addiction and cycles of addiction, and how Jack's father was an alcoholic and Jack's an alcoholic, and he's fighting against that cycle, that urge in him, and trying to be a better husband and trying to be a better father. And he knows he's got a temper and he's working on it. And ultimately he kind of fails, but except for that one moment at the very end where his redemptive nature does come back in, where, the movie is much more about time and memory and isolation. And really, the idea that our identities are fragile and that they shift in the wind based on where we're living, even can totally radically change us into ways that may not be good. So they're both interesting themes, but I think the one more grounded in reality is the one presented by the book. So in that way, as much as time and memory identity are really interesting ideas, I feel like the book brings it all together in a better way. And again, this is very tough to say because I love the film. But yeah, that's my take on that. So ultimately, let's look at it. The novel is more character driven. It's more emotionally tragic. And it really is almost Shakespearean. It's about a good man that falls to his addiction, and causes this abuse, and then at the very end has a little moment of redemption and does the right thing. Versus, the movie, which is much more cosmic horror and, you know, revealing your dark, evil nature that's essentially in every person, and, and how it haunts you and how your identity can be washed away by forces you can't control. So they're radically different stories, even though they have the same basic plot. And for that reason, even though it's weird because I didn't think I would say this, but for that reason, I think the book is better. But what do you guys think? This is just my take on The Shining, and you may have different ideas completely. So let me know in the comments if you feel differently, if you feel the same, and please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. And if you like thrilling fantasy or supernatural suspense, check out my books, Manitou and the Soothsayer, now available on Amazon.